Welcome, everyone. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Kristen Hall. Kristen is a mediator and attorney in private practice here in Des Moines. She received her BA from Vanderbilt University in Communications and her JD from Drake University. Ms. Hall has experience in mediating elder law, employment, and family law disputes. Through her mediation practice, Ms. Hall works with people in conflict to improve communication and find creative solutions. She sees mediation as an opportunity to meet people where they are and help them get past the roadblocks to reach their potential. Mediation provides a safe environment where people can come together to identify the source of their conflict and the goals they share in order to create a new plan moving forward. Ms. Hall is a member of the Iowa Bar Association and currently serves on the board of the Iowa Association of Mediators. She is also on the boards of the Des Moines West Side Chamber of Commerce and Iowa chapter of the National Association of Women Business Owners. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Kristen. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. I want to start out today talking about some statistics, talking about why being able to mediate elder issues is important. Oh, there we go. So our population is growing. As the baby boomers age, you have 10,000 people turning 65 every day. That's what they say. So people 65 and older currently make up 13% of our population. By 2030, that number is going to jump to 20%. And people are working longer. They're working past the age of 65, either because they enjoy the challenge or, in a lot of cases, because it's necessary. The dynamics of how they live is changing too. More than 2 million people, 65 and older, are raising their grandchildren. So the way the families are structured now have changed with time. So as we're living longer, we're also dealing with new issues and a lot of new health issues. In 2012, 15.4 million caregivers provided an estimated 17.5 billion hours of unpaid care. And 60% of these caregivers had to change their work schedule to accommodate their caregiving. So they either had to stay late, leave early, take time off, or take a leave of absence. And this impacts their earning capacity and their retirement down the road. So there's a tremendous amount of stress being put on these caregivers. A lot of people don't want to go to a nursing home, and a lot of them can't afford it because they're very expensive. So you have more people caring for their elderly relatives. So what this means for families, the face of aging is changing. The family composition is changing. There are more blended families. You have more stepchildren and stepparents, and bringing in a whole other dynamic into that family mix. Children don't necessarily live close to their parents anymore. You know, in the old days, everyone lived close by. You could go check on mom and dad. Well, now siblings may be spread out across the country, and mom or dad is living alone back in the family home. So there are a lot more factors that come into play as we age today. And the shifting roles and responsibilities can create a new family dynamic. There's almost a power vacuum. If mom and dad, who have been very strong leaders all of their lives, now can't make this decision, then the siblings have to step up, and you have the question of who's going to step up? Who's going to now be that matriarch, patriarch in the family? And those shifts and changes can create a lot of conflict between the family members. All of these issues and baggage that existed when we were kids, you know, you've got years and years of baggage that come up, and now I'm going to bring up that you stole my tricycle when we were 5. You know, that's a lot of these things come back into play. And there are new needs and responsibilities for the families, and it creates a need for families to plan across the generations and be proactive. You know, we hear about the sandwich generation, that people are caring for their parents and their children still. So there's a lot of stress involved. So families can either plan proactively, or they're going to end up being reactive when a crisis arises, because no matter what, we're all getting older. We are all on some stage of the same path. And how these issues are addressed affects the entire family, not just the elder person. You know, I have a very stubborn German father who, you know, well, if I'm not being useful, just take me out back. And Like, you can't do that. That's not a real option. And what often it comes down to is the tug between safety and autonomy. The kids want mom and dad to be safe. We want to make sure they're taken care of. We don't want anything to happen. The elderly person may say, you know what, I've made it this far. If I'm going out, I'm going out. But it's going to be on my terms. And so that can create some stress too, because it's tough for the kids to let go and let them do that, and it's tough to lose our independence. I fully expect to be the same stubborn German that my father is someday, so we have to do some proactive planning so everyone can get along. So how can mediation help? Mediation is a process for self-determination, and this is the primary difference between mediation and arbitration. In mediation, the families make the decision ultimately. They are the ones that come up with the plan, rather than someone else dictate what the solution should be. This makes it more cost effective when, I have a certain hourly rate, but it's split between the parties the same way that we do in family law. So they can split the cost. It makes it more cost effective. It's more efficient. You don't have to wait to get scheduled into court. You can sit down on the family schedule and start these conversations. You get to think of solutions that are outside the box. Let's look at the dynamics of this particular family. What are the values involved? What are some of the historical things? Where do people live? What are some of the practical considerations we need to take in? And design a solution that is specific to them. It also maintains it's confidential. Everything that happens in the room stays in the room. And it has a good success rate because we are empowering these families, because they have crafted the decision with a facilitator there, but ultimately they've crafted the decision, so now they're invested in it and they're more likely to follow through. Mediation is a great tool whenever there are relationships to be maintained beyond this specific conflict. And in elder cases, when you're looking at maybe contested guardianship or conservatorship, or looking at healthcare options to avoid going down that path, this family has to keep dealing with each other, and you need to be able to find a solution that doesn't just solve the conflict at hand, but gives them the tools that moving forward they'll be able to negotiate and find a solution, keep on track without having to revert back to where they started. So what does this look like? It's a facilitated family meeting. When I do these, I always do conference style. I suppose if you had a case where there was suspicion of elder abuse, or there was a family dynamic that they really didn't want to be in the same room, one of the first calls I got, the family had an elderly father who was now in a wheelchair, was having trouble caring for himself, but in his younger days, he had been very abusive to the point that one of the children, he broke their arm. So even though this man was in his 90s, was in a wheelchair, could not really do anything to anyone, that fear that was created early on by those relationships got in the way, and they didn't want to sit and talk to him. They were terrified, even though there was nothing he could do at this point. So there are situations like that where you may need to look at other options and doing something that's more caucus style if they really can't be in the same room. But ideally, you want them in the same room. And what that allows is to sit down with someone neutral and acknowledge some of the changing needs and roles. Depending on the situation and the diagnosis, I think if you have some of these, if you're talking about Alzheimer's, if you're talking about cancer, some of these things where really there's only one road this is going down. In my experience, I think that people start the grieving process sometimes. And so now you're looking at a different dynamic. You've got to treat people a little bit differently. When I go into mediations, is you've got to meet people where they are. If they've started to grieve, if they know they have Alzheimer's, they're dealing with the fact that mom and dad are going to die, and probably sooner rather than later. And you need to acknowledge that so they can acknowledge, you can kind of separate the emotion from the situation at hand. And the elder mediation creates a platform to bring up some of these difficult topics in a safe environment. It can be, it's tough to talk about. It's tough to talk about the changing needs. It's tough to talk about how mom and dad are going to leave this world. But it can also be an opportunity for some constructive change. A big thing that I see is there's a lack of knowledge about the resources and options available. I'll talk a little later about the program that we've started with the Department on Aging and the area agencies on aging. But one of the mediations we did with them, it was an older brother and sister, and the sibling dynamic doesn't change even if in your 70s and 80s. Big sister was still not going to let little brother tell her what to do. But they were talking about the selling a family house that they had both inherited. And that was what we anticipated the big dispute being, is whether or not this house would be sold. Well, they agreed early on in 5 minutes that the house needed to be sold. The dispute was the how and when. And the issue that we uncovered was that the sister who was still living there had recently lost her child, her husband, a sibling, her pet. There had just been a tremendous amount of death, and this house was the last connection she had to the life that she had grown up knowing. And so even though intellectually she knew that the house had to go, emotionally she was grieving. She didn't want to let go of it because she knew, and she said, when I leave, I'm never going to come back. And there was tremendous sadness when she said that. So we started talking about how the difference between intellectually knowing you have to go, but we need some time for your heart to catch up. And then we started looking at, and this is where my colleague at Aging Resources came in, what can we do to get the house ready to be sold in a few months? So we give her time to heal and find some closure, but we're also still taking action to get them closer to their goal. And Aging Resources is a great resource out there because they can help anyone over 60. They're there for anyone regardless of income level. And they started laying out, here are the options available. Did you know this service will come in and fix the electrical stuff, or this one will help do the building and it's minimal to low cost? We started throwing out those options and those resources, and this brother who had come in, arms crossed, very grumpy, not really wanting to be there, all of a sudden started changing. The shoulders relaxed, the demeanor changed, because now there's options. Now there's something they can do, because that feeling of inaction, that feeling of being stuck is tremendously frustrating, and that can spark a lot of the conflict. So we created a plan for them of how to prepare this house and what the sister would do to find some closure, and we were able to resolve the dispute. But it's bringing in options, and resources are a huge issue. So this really allows for some long-range problem solving and some proactive planning for these families. So why does this work? Why is this different than families just sitting down? One of the big things is I talked about the dynamic in the family, and that power vacuum. Using a mediator, using that neutral facilitator, takes the pressure off the family members to control the discussion, because there's always that one family member, maybe there's a couple, that thinks they're in charge. And a lot of times it's the eldest child, but I'm going to step in, I'm going to be in charge, and everyone else says, no. Why you? Why not me? This takes the pressure off of that. That's no longer an option on the table, because now you have a neutral person leading this discussion. And that discussion, that conversation is very solution-oriented. We change the conversation from process to needs. Our needs are very universal. We need, in case of elder, we want mom and dad to be safe. We want to make sure that we can pay for their care, that the resources are there, or we know how to get them on assistance if they happen to need that. Some of those needs are, everyone can agree on those. The challenge comes with how we're going to do that. And people tend to get into their little rut. We have to do this. They put the blinders on, it's my way. And so you have the my way versus your way argument. There may be 8 other options out there available, but they can't see them. So part of my job as the mediator is to pull back that lens and help them reframe the issues. So when I go in, my process is to first identify where we are. What needs are there? Can mom and dad still be in the home? Do they need help in the home? Do they have medical issues? Do we know where the finances are? Is someone set up to help them? What are all of the needs we have right now to address? Then we look at the resources available to address them. And we talk about who's going to do what and how we're going to communicate going forward. Because you will annoy each other again. In any mediation I do, at some point you're going to, if the relationship's continuing, at some point you're going to annoy each other. What you can do is make better choices. You can choose now, in this calm space, how you're going to deal with each other moving forward. Give you one example that comes up is the financial issues. So maybe Susie's going over to help mom and dad with the checkbook. Either they can't sign for arthritis, something else, they can't handle it anymore, so she's helping them pay the bills so that the lights stay on, the mortgage gets paid, everything's okay. Well, Brother Bob comes in and goes, what are you doing with mom's money? What are you doing with that checkbook? You shouldn't have that. They kind of jump to the assumption that something nefarious is going on. And Susie's going, I'm keeping everything running. Well, we've jumped to that assumption. The other sibling gets defensive. Now this kind of snowballs into an issue it doesn't really need to be. When we come down to it, maybe the practical solution is for Susie to keep doing what she's doing, but they both get to see the bank statements once a month. Or they decide up front we have to do an expenditure over $5,000, we've got to replace an appliance or something. Then we'll agree that we get 3 bids and we'll talk over it before anything is paid. Put those processes in place to help them communicate better. Help keep those lines of communication open, because in the absence of information, we assume our own, and we don't assume for the best. We assume that someone's trying to take advantage. So some of it is when we look at how we're going to communicate forward, how could we have stopped this from happening? How do we not repeat this mistake in the future? And you start planting that seed in people, they will remember. It'll pop up when they start to get angry and that little voice goes, wait a minute, you're going to do something different this time. It also helps the participants say what they mean to say and hear what's being said to them. When we're in conflict, our anxiety level goes up, the stress level goes up, and we don't communicate well. We don't say what we mean, and the people don't hear what we mean to say. I can still remember a communications class in college, and the lesson of this exercise was that the effectiveness of how we communicate isn't judged by what we say, it's judged by what the other person hears. And as a neutral party in the room, I can restate what someone has said, and the person across the table will hear it differently from me because they don't have any baggage with me. I have not been fighting with them as a sibling for 40 years. And so it changes. They'll hear it from me and they go, oh, is that what you meant? Okay. So having that neutral party in there really can keep the temperature down, and we can manage sometimes the tempers need to flare a little bit, and that's okay. Had another one where once the tempers flared, they're both kind of holding it together, and once one of them kind of went off a little bit, then we were able to get a resolution because that other person needed to hear it. So it's an interesting job, but having someone there to manage some of those emotions, some of those issues, and manage that communication is a great service for the families. And like I said, mediation provides that process for families to resolve the conflict without further damaging the relationship. So in mediation, and this is my style, I'm sure people do things differently, but they're encouraged to listen to understand and not just respond. When we feel listened to, when we feel that someone has heard us, it makes us much more likely to listen to others. When I mediate, I talk to all of the parties individually before we go into the room together. And that gives them a chance to vent, because sometimes there's things we really need to say that we really don't need to say in front of other people. But they can get it off their chest. This has been bottled up, it's been festering, and I let them get out the festering with me, because at the end of that venting, then I get down to what the real issues are. And when I can repeat those back to them, when I can acknowledge that, you see the body language shift. You see the relaxation. You hear that, yes, that's my problem. And so you get down to those core issues. So that way when I go into the room, I can identify, as I've talked to everybody, here are the core issues that I've identified. And now we've gotten that out there without everybody else having to hear all the ugly, festering stuff that's built up. The other thing that I encourage people to do is to be present. We need to acknowledge the past actions because those are the elephants in the room. And my feeling is you either address them directly or you're going to fight them passive-aggressively because they're still there. Those are those unmet needs that they're holding back from when they were 13 or 10 or 20. When you get those out and acknowledge them and acknowledge that that's a real feeling that really happened, that really had that effect, we can also separate them from the current situation. What I like to tell people is just because a hurt wasn't intentional doesn't mean it didn't hurt, but just because just because it hurt doesn't make it intentional, and just because it wasn't intentional doesn't mean it didn't hurt. And so we acknowledge that something happened and that's something for them to deal with, but you ask the question, how does that impact what nursing home mom and dad go to? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't have anything to do with it. So you can, by acknowledging it, you can separate it out from the current situation. My other favorite piece of advice is to assume good intentions. And that isn't as Pollyanna as it sounds, but it's more stopping yourself from jumping to false conclusions. So when Sister Susie has done something, stop, take a breath, and then ask why. I'm curious why you did this. And what that solves is the problem of making accusations, the defensiveness, the snowball that I talked about. So assuming good intentions is just asking why, because oftentimes we may be on two different paths trying to get to the same place. And so when you hear the why behind the action, okay, I see what you were trying to do. I would have done it differently, but you're still trying to get to the same place. So you're talking about it on a different level then. So who do we bring in? Who can participate in these mediations? The aging individual is the first one on the list. And my colleagues at the Aging Resources, as they say, no decision about me without me. This is their life, ultimately. And there may be decisions that need to be made for practical reasons that they're not fond of, but they deserve the respect of being part of that conversation. There may be instances where you need to have an advocate. If there are health issues we're concerned about, you might want an advocate to be there. And I've had some of those where there's been a case manager involved that helps to speak for them and helps them say what they're meaning. It just takes the pressure off a little bit. But someone who can advocate, that may be a spouse or a life companion, it may be a friend who can be kind of that neutral voice to help the family hear what they're not really ready to hear. The children in there, if there are siblings that will be involved, you can also bring in financial advisors, care option specialists. One of the nice things about using mediation and not going through the court system is you can create this team of individuals that can find the right solution to bring in a variety of options for these families. I have a friend who she will come in and work with aging families that have reached crisis mode, and I calls it a financial forensics. How are we going to pay for it? What's available? How can we liquidate? What are the tax implications? How do we get the most out of the resources so that we can pay for care as long as possible before we're going on assistance? That's the kind of person you can bring in. If there are questions about what the state of health really is and what the progression might be, talk to their doctors. We always have to have permission to do that, but bring in those resources that can help you understand what's going on. When we had in our family, my husband's grandfather they had to get assistance for him, and they were dealing with some of the issues that he was facing with dementia and some other things. But talking to some of the nurses and care providers that I have in my network, it was very educational. I understood why he was acting the way he was, and telling my husband and his family what I'd learned, they started to see their grandfather differently. He wasn't just being a stubborn old coot. There were reasons behind what he was doing, and it made it easier to deal with him. It took some of the stress away because this was the disease making him do this. It wasn't beyond his control, and it wasn't in their control. They weren't doing anything wrong. This is just the ravages of the disease he was dealing with. So being able to bring in those other people to educate the family, to give them as many options and resources as possible, can really alleviate some of the conflict and stress, because now there's something to choose from. They're not so stuck. So the kinds of issues that might be discussed. What are the current arrangements? Do they need help with their daily care? Can having someone come in a couple times a week be enough? Do we really need someone to check in on them every day? Can they stay in their house? Is it financially feasible? Do they need more dedicated care, either in assisted living, independent living, nursing home? Do we think of this, is their health condition something that they're okay now, but we know in 2 years they won't be, or they're unlikely to be, so what can we start doing now to prepare? Who's going to handle the financial matters and the medical matters? Do they have a power of attorney? Do they have a healthcare power of attorney? Do they have an advance directive? Who's going to make those decisions? And that's an important conversation, because that can be tough for families. Understanding what they want, even if someone has the healthcare power of attorney or the advance directive, that can still be a tough decision to make. Family members may not understand. When you can discuss those issues in the room as a family, it gives the older individual a chance to make their wishes known to everybody at the same time. We create an agreement at the end of this process, so this can be in writing so everyone sees it, because they may forget when we're in crisis, when it's the question of do we pull the plug or not, we may forget what was said, but we have it in writing. And it's that chance for mom or dad to really have their say while they still can. We can also address the future arrangements. Let's run through some if-then scenarios. So, okay, now you can stay in the house. What happens if you fall down the stairs? What happens if you can't care for yourself? How do we know? If the siblings are all spread over the country, they may not see it. You know, their conversation may be a phone call, and the phone call could be mom or dad, that's nice, dear. You know, very limited conversation, so they don't see they have trouble making breakfast, or they have trouble writing a check. They don't see some of the decline. So how are we going to keep an eye on that moving forward? What do we, if the decision comes and we have to provide home care or a nursing home, what sort of things are important? What sort of, and it can be, it's not, price is obviously a very big part of it, because it's expensive. Long-term care is incredibly expensive. But what sort of environment do you want? Do you want something that has a lot of activities? Do you want something where you can have a cocktail in the evening? From a very personal level, what's going to make it easier if they have to transition somewhere else? And again, the powers of attorney, the level of medical intervention. What advance directives do you want? Is it, nope, if I'm not doing everything I want, send me on? Or do you want to be able to stick around? You know, just running through the scenarios and having their say while they can. And I'll talk a little bit about the current program that we created. A couple years ago, the Department on Aging approached the Iowa Association of Mediators to do a joint training on elder mediation. So the initial training was 2 days with Zena Zameta, and following that there was further discussion that we really needed to create a program that would make this an option across the state. And so what we did was work with the Department on Aging, the Iowa Mediators, and then the area agencies on aging. And if you're not familiar with that, there are now 6 area agencies around the state, and they are designed, Central Iowa is fairly compact, but it's designed for a population that has 100,000 60 or over. And what they wanted from us was to help train their people to have a better idea of what mediation is, so they can identify situations where it might help. But they also wanted at least one person in each of their agencies to be trained to be able to do this. So we did a training last summer and trained private mediators as well as agency personnel to be able to do these elder mediations. And the program is designed to use a co-mediation model. So when I go in here, it's me and my colleague at Aging Resources, and how it tends to work is I tend to take the lead, but she's there to provide some of those resources and that other information that can be so valuable. And the cases come in oftentimes through their agency, through their case managers. The area agencies provide case management services. They provide, Des Moines, it's a lot of referral services, so Meals on Wheels, home assistance, in-home care. They have a lot of options here. In some of the rural areas, sometimes the agencies will also be the service provider. So, but what we've done is we have people trained in every area of the state to be able to perform these mediations. What the Department of Aging was seeing was situations where families just didn't have any options. If they weren't getting along, they had to go to court. Or if there were arguments, they would, in some situations, the siblings wouldn't agree, they'd both walk away, and now you have an elderly person that's been abandoned. So the families really needed another option to have these conversations, to be able to understand what their obligations are, what their options are, what the resources are out there, so that the elder people are receiving the care that they need, and the family relationships are staying intact. It's interesting. We had some of the agency people were not entirely sure what they had been sent to be trained in, but it was a week-long training, and by the end we had converts. They understood how this could help people. What a great resource this is for families that don't know where else to go, to not have to go to court or to call the police, or to be able to have a way to change the family dynamic, to change how they relate to each other, to get out of some of these difficult situations and provide them the tools to do so. So, I have questions. It'll pop up. Oh, thank you. Oh, there we go. I guess do one time. What suggestions do you have for the elder person when making the plan? Is very cooperative and even picks out alternative living locations. However, as she ages, she becomes more unwilling to realize her limitations, loses the ability to drive, forgets things, but has difficulty do what she planned to do when she was in good health. And I think what I would suggest is when you start to see some of these changes, because the decline oftentimes is gradual, continue the conversation, keep reminding, and gradual steps, I think, is better than sometimes making that big leap. I'm going to leave and go to a nursing home. If you can, when you start to see the little signs, to start making the smaller changes, so it's not so shocking. Because as they age, as some of these health deteriorations happen, they really want to hold on to what's secure, on what they know, because there may be a lot of things that they can't identify that they know anymore. So the things that are safe and comfortable to them, are secure to them, it can be difficult to let go of. So sometimes when you start to see the gradual changes, to keep having that conversation, is this still what you want to do? Has something changed, or has, do we need to start looking at bringing someone in? Do we need to look at looking at maybe places you want to go? I know the car keys can be a difficult thing to give up. And sometimes it's talking about if they really won't do it, you have to take them away, because you can't let that danger be there. But it's maybe there are car services that she can call, so she still has some sort of control in there. Look for little ways that she can still be autonomous, or while putting in some of the safety measures. So. Maybe that was the same one. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. Okay. What would AIM project like the attorneys to do when clients come to us for legal assistance? Do you want us to refer clients to the project before we file anything in court? I think that is helpful. I think the more things that we can resolve outside of the courtroom, it provides a faster solution for the clients, and it doesn't send things to court that don't need to go to court. A lot of times when I do these, what starts out as a legal issue is really a family issue when you get down to it. And when you can resolve the family issue, which is better suited to mediation than the court, the legal issue will often take care of itself, or it's a much smoother solution. But oftentimes what we find is we're going to go to court, we're going to get a guardianship or concern, I'm just going to take over. Okay, because you're angry and frustrated and you're annoyed with your siblings, so there's a little bit of spite there too, those delightful family dynamics. But when you can start out there going through mediation first, and just like we do with family law, what can you resolve ahead of time? So when you're going to court, and you may still have to, if it's a guardian or conservatorship, you're going to have to, but if you can go with the family speaking as one voice, it's going to be simpler on everybody. If there has been, excuse me, if there is abuse, that's definitely a red flag. It doesn't always preclude mediation. I spoke with the Polk County attorneys, and some of the financial abuse that they see, some of it is really the smarmy financial abuse. Some of it is families, honest to God, not understanding that mom's money isn't theirs. And mom's all of a sudden had a stroke, I got to pay bills, and they may be well-intentioned, but they're doing stupid things. And well-intentioned and stupid things you can educate, and you can create new processes for them to follow. When you really have criminal activity going on, that's a different case. If there has been abuse in the past, like the case I mentioned, that hinders the communication, people have to be able to openly communicate, and they need to feel safe to do that in mediation for it to be successful. If the family dynamic, if there's been abuse to the point where that isn't possible, then I think you probably have to go another route. But sometimes you can do caucus style and you can still get where you need to go. Maybe 5 of the siblings are fine, 1 was a little nefarious. I think you could bring the 5 together and create a plan that overrides, say we have that prodigal sibling that has come back all of a sudden to take care of mom, and really is taking advantage. But you have other siblings or aunts and uncles or some other resources that can step in and take over. I think that would still be appropriate for mediation. You probably would not include the prodigal child, but you could work with the rest of the family to find a solution. Okay. So how often do guardian and conservatorship issues come up, and are there ways to avoid them with families? One way to avoid it is to do some of the proactive planning. Get those power of attorneys in place early. I've been meeting with bankers and finding out what they need on their end, and talking about power of attorneys and how do we make this process smoother for families. A lot of this stuff you can do ahead of time. If the elder person will put that in place early and set inside, here's what I want to happen, here's who I want to do what when I can't do it for myself, and get the paperwork done ahead of time, then you alleviate the need for some of the guardian conservatorship issues. But that is one, it's who's going to do what. Mom and Dad can't make decisions, we've got to do something, and that's kind of the fallback position. And you can also have situations, I just had one the other day, that brother's the guardian and sister's the conservator, and they can't get along and agree. And that's another one. Bring them together. The issue in that was that the sister was so thoroughly overwhelmed, she didn't completely understand what she needed to be doing. So those are the conversations you can have early on to provide that education. If there's a family attorney, this is the resource. If you have questions, go talk to them. But people don't know. I just know I have this piece of paper. Or I had someone tell me today, her mother's just signing, the mother's the power of attorney for an aunt. Well, she's just signing checks and putting POA after it. Well, that's not going to work. They haven't gone to the bank to say this is now effective. They've had a stroke or whatever. So the more we can do to plan proactively and to educate people on what this looks like, because people don't understand. We live in this world, so we understand what the processes are. Clients don't. And so that's a big service that we can do as attorneys and mediators, is to help them understand what's going to happen, so they're not trying to learn all of this when they're in that state of grief or crisis. This is a good question. How do you determine an elder's capacity to fully understand and participate? Sometimes they're able to hide their lack of capacity quite well with vague answers to questions. You are absolutely right. Part of the AIM program, the Area Agencies on Aging created a questionnaire to go through. When they created one for the elder to do sort of a scan and see if they can answer some of these questions, and it allows us to assess a little bit where they are, at least if there are red flags, at which point I would call on my colleagues at Aging Resources, because they obviously deal with this stuff every day, but at least knows where the red flags are. They also created an assessment for the caregiver, and part of the use of that is for the caregiver to see where their stress is, how much stress they're under, because it's incredibly stressful. Where are they? And that also helps when you're talking to the siblings or other family members to be able to have an objective assessment of the stress level going on. Because if you're not the caregiver, they don't always get what the big deal is. Well, it's a big deal. It's causing tremendous stress and pressure on them. Maybe if you don't live nearby, you can hire some respite care for them and give them a break a couple days a week. I mean, it allows, the more information you can bring into the room, the more options you can introduce. And sometimes it's getting more, if they're giving vague questions, you kind of reframe the question and keep asking. But if they really can't give you any straight answers, I think that's a red flag that comes up. Where should family go to find these services? AIM, or start with a local agency? Aging Resources, which is on Grand Avenue here in Des Moines, is a fantastic resource. They deal with aging issues. They also deal with disability issues, and the departments have integrated disability issues into all of these agencies because there are a lot of similar things that they have to deal with, the safety, the autonomy, some of the services. So that's always a great place to start. If you're looking at services, they can direct you. And so that would be my best advice. I've developed quite a network as I've gone out networking of people that understand these issues and want to help the elderly population. Do judges make referrals to AIM? Is there any cooperation with the judicial branch? Um, that's a good question. The probate section of the bar is currently working on a project to try to create a pilot probate mediation program. The issue we've come up against is whether or not the judges have the authority to order people to mediation. So the probate committee is trying to work on a way to get that authority so that the referrals can start coming from the court. Every judge we've talked to thinks it's a great idea, but then the question becomes how. So we're working on the how right now. So to learn more about, and well, I'm going to say if I have it with me now. So the contact information for Aging Resources here in Des Moines is agingresources.com is their website. You can also go on the Department on Aging site to learn more about mediation, or if you're not in Central Iowa, to find the other agencies in your area, and that's iowaaging.gov. Okay. Oh, maybe that's being a question. Is there a national network of agencies like Aging Resources for families that are trying to help elderly parents long distance? Yes. Every state, as I understand it, has area agency on aging. And actually our group is going to speak at their national conference next summer. I think it's out in Philadelphia, maybe. But yes, there are area agencies in every state, as I understand it. How do we find out who the trained mediators are in our area outside Des Moines? Who do we direct our clients to? Well, you can email me. I have a list of everyone that we've trained, and you can go to the Iowa Association of Mediators website, iamediators.org, I believe, or you can contact me, or you can contact the area agency on aging in your area, and they will have the contacts. They'll have the list of who is there in their area. What's the first thing you say to families when you meet with them to solve problems? It's a good question. The focus, I don't know exactly what I say, but the focus I keep is that, I thank them for being there. I thank them for wanting to work together. My philosophy whenever I go in to mediate is to meet people where they are. My goal is to help them be a contribution. Every one of us wants to be a contribution. We want to be able to help. We want to be able to do good on some level. There may be roadblocks in the way, getting in our way, but if I give everyone that credit for wanting to be the contribution, then it's easier for me to identify the roadblocks. I ask different questions, I hear their answers differently, and we can try to pull some of those things out of the way. But it's going in, giving them credit for stepping up to try. And it's identifying early on that common goal. We're going to find a solution for mom and dad. There is a solution out there, and sometimes it's that reassurance too, because people feel so hopeless and overwhelmed in crisis that they lose sight that there are other options available. So it's going in with a very positive attitude that we can solve this, and them stepping up to have that conversation and try and come to the meeting is a huge first step. Do the AIM mediators charge a fee? Yes. They have the rate that I charge privately, but then there's also the area agencies also have a sliding fee. So when it comes in, they may ask the client to pay something. If they can't do anything, then there are other ways that the mediators get paid. Because of their funding sources, this is a service that they're providing to the elderly. They're able to fund the program in other ways. So if there's really, if the people can't pay, then that's taken into consideration, because we want this to be accessible to everybody. What type of training qualities for an elder mediator? So under the standards the Iowa Association of Mediators created for our elder mediator certification is 25 hours of general mediation training and then 15 hours that's topic specific in the elder care. Part of that is substantive, understanding the issues that come up with guardianships, conservatorships, powers of attorney, wills, some of the nightmare of getting assistance and funding and how that's done, the red flags that are there, but also understanding the family dynamics, understanding what it's like to work with the aging individual. We also include a section on elder abuse that the Department on Aging has created for us so that we can see the red flags. You know, as attorneys, we're permissive reporters, we're not mandatory, but you want to be able to see those red flags and get people the help that they need. You want to understand what you're looking at. So that's what we're looking at. So overall it's a 40-hour training, which is the same as family law, but it's 25 general and then 15 topic specific. And we are potentially looking at, we did a training last summer, we're potentially looking at doing another one, but I don't have one planned right now. Okay, that's the last one on my list. So, you know, I just want to thank everybody for coming on to this. I think there is a tremendous amount of good that we can do for aging families. The aging population is only going to grow, and they need options and resources, and the more that we can help them proactively, the smoother transition that's going to be as we age, as they enter that last stage of life. This is a great opportunity to make that easier on the elderly and their families. So thank you all for your interest.